the category known for tough-to-watch content from 2020. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today, we're going to be diving into some Oscar-related content. Most people typically see some movies that are nominated for Best Picture or up for the acting categories, but there are some categories that tend to go under the radar for the majority of people, none more so than the short films. There are 3 short film categories, and although they do get released in theaters, they don't make it out everywhere, even in a normal year. All of the indie theaters within hours of me are still closed, but luckily one of them was doing a virtual cinema for the shorts this year, so I was still able to watch them. Just like last year, I wanted to do a 3-part Rankography series to give everybody a sense of these shorts, even if you don't have the chance to make it out to see them yourself. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. First up in my 2021 Oscar-nominated shorts Rankography series, documentaries. Of all of the short film categories, this is usually the one that's the hardest to track down, and shows in the fewest theaters, so it tends to be the most underseen of the categories. The 5 nominees are A Concerto is a Conversation, A Love Song for Latasha, Colette, Do Not Split, and Hunger Ward. Since this is a Rankography, I'm going to be ranking these shorts, but remember, this is just my ranking, not the ranking, so be sure to post your own personal ranking of the 2021 documentary short subject Oscar nominees in the comments below. Coming in at number 5, A Concerto is a Conversation. This is a US submission and was directed by Ben Proudfoot and Chris Bowers. This short focuses on composer Chris Bowers as he has a conversation with his grandfather about their family history and his grandfather's life. And as the title suggests, this film relates the conversation between grandson and grandfather to the music that Chris has composed. I have to say, even though I'm putting this in last place, I still like this film. This year's documentary short nominees were all really strong, and so this placement comes down to 2 things. First off, this is the light film of the nominees. It's not a super upbeat, constantly cheery film by any means, but compared to the rest, which are an onslaught of dire and harrowing tales, this feels light, which is usually a detriment in this category. And while I really like the personal family story and the idea of relating the conversation to a concerto, I really disliked the presentation style here. I know that they were trying to simulate the intimacy of an actual one-on-one conversation, but having these 2 speak directly to the camera was a mistake, because it came off feeling less natural and less personal than if they were just sitting next to each other having this conversation. Coming in at number 4, Do Not Split. This is a joint US-Norwegian submission, filmed in Hong Kong, and was directed by Anders Hammer. This film focuses on the Anti-Extradition Law Amendment Bill, or anti-ELAB, movement in Hong Kong, and the associated protests. Not only does it feature some interviews, but it also has a lot of footage of the protests, as well as the sieges on 2 universities. Like I said with the last short, despite this placement, I thought this was a really good movie. It's intense, and with all of the footage of the protests, it puts you right in the thick of things. You feel like you're there, and you get visual perspectives from a lot of different places, embedded with the protesters, from behind the police blockades, from a distance observing sieges. It's a very image and emotion-forward film, and I will say it does take a while before we get enough interviews and information to truly provide a lot of context to what we're seeing. I already knew the basics of this movement, so it wasn't really a big deal for me, but I think if somebody who doesn't really know anything about the reasoning behind these protests watches this film, they might feel a little lost for the majority of it. So I wish the message side of things was a little bit stronger from the get-go, but it's certainly effective from an emotional standpoint. Coming in at number 3, Hunger Ward. This is another US submission, though it's set exclusively in Yemen, and was co-directed by Skye Fitzgerald and Michael Schuerman. This film is about the still ongoing famine in Yemen, and focuses on the efforts of 2 hospitals attempting to combat severe child malnutrition. This is a tough watch. There are a lot of horrifying and fairly startling images of not only the malnourished kids, but also of grieving families, as well as camera footage of missile strikes. At times, this sort of reminded me of The Cave, which is a Syrian film about a hospital that was nominated for Best Documentary Feature at last year's Oscars. But this is certainly its own thing, and has its own unique focus on malnourished children. It does feel a bit manipulative at times, not so much of us as the audience, but more of the families involved. But it's used effectively to highlight and bring attention to this crisis. It's another very image and emotion-driven film, but I think the story and message is more straightforward from the start. Coming in at number 2, A Love Song for Latasha. This is another US submission and was directed by Sophia Nali Allison. This short focuses on the life of Latasha Harlins, as remembered by her family and childhood friend. Harlins' murder, when she was only 15 years old, was one of the instigating factors of the 1992 LA riots, but this film really looks at the personal implications of this event and showcases the person that Latasha was. This is a very strong film. It's a tough watch, but unlike the other tough watches in this category, it's not because of the imagery, it's the emotion behind it. Featuring minimal classic interviews, this short instead uses an interesting blend of voiceover narration, sorta dreamy, hazy recreation, and modern-day shots of locations to tell its story. It also incorporates some MTV-style animation and art, as well as visual static to emulate the experience of watching a VHS tape. This all makes the presentation style easily the most creative of this year's documentary shorts, which is really important because the presentation of documentaries is a difficult thing. So finding a way to stylistically stand out while also still fitting the topic is a big part of why this film is so effective. It's also remarkably effective at painting an emotional picture of who Latasha was and of her impact on those around her. So that means my number 1 documentary short of 2021 is Colette. This is another US submission, filmed in France and Germany, and was directed by Anthony Giacchino. It tells the story of Colette Marin Catherine, a former French resistance member, who travels to Germany for the first time in order to visit the concentration camp in which her brother died. In a year full of emotional and tough-to-watch documentary short nominees, my number 1 film might just be the most emotional. Somewhat similar to my number 2 pick, this isn't a short that puts its emotions forward through shocking imagery. Yes, it's about the death of a prisoner at a concentration camp, but we don't see any of the horrifying pictures that are typically associated with films of that nature. Instead, this is a movie about Colette, about a very strong and very candid 90-something-year-old woman traveling to visit the ruins of the place her brother and so many others spent his last few weeks. Stylistically, it's a fairly typical journey to a location documentary, but Colette herself is what elevates this one. Her honesty, her responses to various things on this trip, even her dubiousness at the point of documenting morbid things. She was the emotional heart of this film and made it really resonate with me. Alright, so that's my rankography for the 2021 Oscar nominees for documentary short subject. Have you had a chance to see these documentary shorts? If so, what does your ranking look like? I'd love to see some reasoning for your order, so be sure to post it in the comments below. Also, make sure to stop back over the next couple weeks for my rankographies of the live action and animated shorts, as well as some more Oscar-related content. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this rankography, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this, as well as movie reviews. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.